Got a brand new Leica M lens for you, the TTArtisan 35mm f2 APO spherical Leica M lens. Very nice lens. Let's take a look. Hi guys, Matt here from MrLeica.com. If you're a regular viewer, normally I show lots of pretty portrait photos to show what a lens can do. Today's slightly different. This is a first impressions video with sample testing shots just to give you an idea of whether or not you need to buy this lens before I get time to do a more detailed review at a later date. First impressions, it's a little bit big and it's a little bit heavy, but it is sharp. If you're only interested in sharpness and you don't care about size and weight, there's a good chance you're going to love this lens. But I would say this lens isn't for everybody, and stay with me until the end and I'll tell you who it's best going to suit, because it's definitely not for everybody. And it does have one massive weakness, and I wrote to TTArtisan to say, guys, I would have thought you would have corrected it before sending it out to market to sell. Okay, so first impressions, yes, it is a big lens for like an M lens. For those of you shooting like M cameras, this lens will make your camera very front heavy. It weighs in at 540 grams, which is 19 ounces. The lens does seem really well made. I am a big fan of some of the TTArtisan lenses. I love the 50 0.95 and I love the 28 f5.6 in particular. If we ignore the size aspect for a second, this lens is really nicely made. Beautifully smooth focus throw with a close focus distance of 0.7 meters, based on a Leica M lens like most of the TTArtisan lenses. So it's in black finish. It's got a beautiful focus tab and it's got half stop aperture clicks with a nice clicky stops. It's not quite as smooth as Voigtlander and Leica aperture scales, but the focus itself is really smooth and there's no wobble and it feels really tight and nicely made. And it's got the hyperfocal distance scale on the top. One thing I did notice, which is really beautifully made as well, is the lens hood. But it's got a really nice screw-in fit and then like a rubber washer to make it a really nice tight fit. I forgot to mention the lens cap. This lens has got a really nice lens cap that slides on over the hood and it stays in place and doesn't fall off. Really easy to just slide in, slide off. Great design. The front filter thread is 52mm for those of you wanting to use filters. Being a like M lens, this lens is rangefinder coupled, but it's not ideal for rangefinder users because being a big lens, it does block a lot of the viewfinder, as you can see here. This lens, like other TTArtisan and 7Artisan lenses, doesn't come calibrated, so you will get a tool in the box, so you can then fine tune your calibration once you receive it if it's not quite sharp at either 0.7 meters or at infinity. Let's now look at some test photos and then I'll talk about other options and the pricing and whether or not this lens is for you. Okay, so I did testing with both the SL and the Lumix. Here you can see my crude mirror selfie testing with the Lumix. And this was the testing that really set the alarm bells ringing for me. And I was like, what the heck is going on? Why is this lens performing so badly? So what do I mean? So firstly, I was testing for sharpness, and sharpness being an APO lens is very good, both at close focus, and I'll come on to infinity in a second. But what I did notice doing my mirror selfies is this lens flares really easily. And not just that, it flares very badly to the point that you have no photo. So I was like, am I going crazy or what's going on? So I grabbed my Voigtlander 35 f2 Ultron lens. This is a non-APO lens, but it is a really good performer. So I put that lens on, did exactly the same mirror selfie, and there was no flare, not even a tiny bit of flare. So I wrote to TTArtisan and said, I want to check that you sent me the right copy of the lens before I tell the whole world how it performs. And she was like, yeah, this is it. So the lens coatings are not as good as the Voigtlander and Leica coatings in that this lens will flare. However, it is better corrected than non-APO lenses, and I'll come on to that next. So flare, if you don't point the lens at the sun, you will get nice contrast and nice sharpness straight out of camera, wide open at f2. As soon as you adjust the angle of the lens just slightly, you'll get flare. So here's a more extreme example. This is the hand shielding the lens, so no flare. Here's the photo without my hand with flare, without flare, with flare. As you can see, it's quite a dramatic difference. I also did some sunstar testing, and you can get sunstars from this lens as you stop the lens down. It may just be a bit of a challenge trying to get sunstars without some flare. Okay, what about infinity? Now for this test, I did it without shooting at direct sunlight to make it more of a fair test. And again, I shot it against my Voigtlander 35 Ultron non-APO lens. If you want the sharpest from Voigtlander, get the 35 f2 APO. And I have done a full review on that lens and it is crazy sharp. But the one I had to hand is the Ultron, which I really rate. So how does it compare against my favourite Ultron? To my perhaps sadness, a lot better than the Ultron. Center sharpness on the Ultron and on the TTArtisan 35 APO is both pretty good wide open at f2, but if you go towards the edges, this is where the difference is extremely dramatic. Being an APO lens, for those of you that don't know, APO stands for apochromatic, and that's a design to give you less colour fringing and less chromatic aberration. And I thought this example proved it absolutely perfectly without even planning to do so. So as you can see on the roof, here's a photo shot wide open f2 with the Ultron. Obviously a tight crop in, probably 200% crop. And then here's the same photo shot with the APO. As you can see, there's perfect detail, zero colour cast, zero chromatic aberration on the APO version, but the Ultron one in comparison looks a bit soft and mushy. So I was like, wow. So I stopped both lenses down, repeated the test, and the APO is just sharp at every setting up to, I didn't test beyond f8, but it's just sharp f2, f2.8, f4, f5.6, and it's just going to get a little bit sharper each time you stop down. The Ultron does catch up from around 5.6 in terms of edge sharpness and better corrected, but if you only want a lens to shoot wide open, the APO is definitely going to be your choice. Just going back to center sharpness, yes, both lenses are sharper, but I think the APO again wins. It's got perhaps more clarity, more contrast, and just a bit more pop to it, being a better corrected APO lens, which would make sense. APO versus non-APO. In theory, the APO should always win, and it does. I then wanted to test vignetting on both lenses, so I just pointed the camera at the sky. As you can see, the vignetting on the Ultron is pretty heavy at f2, and then that goes away by about 5.6 f8. The APO has got some vignetting wide open at f2, but much, much less than the Ultron. And again, once you stop down, it's pretty much gone. So the APO is starting to look like it is the better of the two lenses, but stay with me. If you're interested in bokeh and you're a Leica M shooter, you really need a lens which will focus at closer than 0.7 meters, because you need to get closer to blow the background out of focus more. The advantages of lenses like the Leica Summicron f2 APO, I'll come on to that. That focuses to 0.3 meters, and then the Ultron in this example focuses to 0.58 meters. Using both lenses at minimum focus distance, the Ultron versus the APO, the Ultron wins just because it can focus that bit closer. My top hack for all Leica SL and CL users is 100% buy yourself, treat yourself to the very affordable 7Artisan's close focus adapter L to M mount. That lets you close focus every lens, and then you can get around this problem really easily. If you saw my Voigtlander Helia 40 f2.8 video, all those product shots are all shot with the TTArtisan 35 APO, but they were shot on a close focus adapter, meaning you could get that bit closer and zero cropping was necessary. From the test photos I did for this video, I'd say the colours are good, the contrast is good, the sharpness is amazing, it's very well corrected. It's got minimum vignetting compared to many f2 lenses. However, the flare is bad. Can I recommend this lens, and who can I recommend this lens to? Because it's not going to be for everybody. Maybe first you want to know how much the lens costs. So let's do the price first. If you want an APO lens, you've only got three options for Leica M mount at time of recording, which is August 2022. You've got the Leica 35 APO, which comes in $8,300 or £6,700, being obviously the most expensive, but it is the smallest and it does focus the closest. If you can get one, there's a massive waiting list. Second option is a Voigtlander 35 f2 APO lens. That lens costs $1,150 or £900. That lens is quite a bit bigger than the Leica version, but it's still smaller and lighter than the TTArtisan. And then the price of the TTArtisan 35 f2 APO, $468 or £394 if you buy from Pergear, which seems to be the only place you can buy that lens currently. I can put a link below. You might need to pre-order it if it's not already available. So the big question is this lens right for you? It depends on what camera you use and what type of lens you like. If you love the tactile feel of nicely made manual focus lenses with proper aperture scales and a metal and glass and all of this fly-by-wire rubbish, if you want to call it that, then you'll like the lens, but it depends on what camera you're going to use. If you're using like an M camera, I don't think it's ideal because it's so front heavy. Number one, you've got a lot of viewfinder blockage. Number two, it's not calibrated out of the box. Number three, say if you're like an M film user, it's a bit of a pain because you've got to calibrate it all before you use the lens. Whereas if you're shooting mirrorless, it's much easier. So I'd say it's probably not suited for M users unless you're using the accessory EVF, and that way you won't be affected by the viewfinder blockage. And so I guess that will give you a setup which will give you APO sharpness, pretty good price, and you can use your existing M camera if you're using a digital M camera. So digital M camera is better than a film M camera, but I'd say it's not ideal for either. Your hands will get tired if you're holding a heavy lens like this all day without a grip. Maybe get a grip if you're a diehard M shooter. If you use any of the Leica SL series cameras, I think this lens is much better suited to the bigger bodies with the better ergonomics, and you've got a built-in EVF, so you don't need to calibrate, and you can even use the closed focus adapter that I mentioned. If your style of photography is to shoot at the sun, which I tend to do for most of my portraits, this lens definitely isn't the best choice. But if you shoot with the sun, and so the sun's behind you, this lens will give you amazing super sharp images. If you're, say, a Lumix S camera shooter or any other mirrorless camera, this lens will give you super sharp, well-corrected images if you just want best value for money lens and you don't care about it being slightly heavy. Are there better options for the money? The only lens which comes to mind would be if you're a SL user or any of the L-mount cameras, or I think probably Sony as well. Sigma do the Sigma 35 f2 DGDN lens. That lens is sharp, wide open f2. It's also very well corrected. It also has minimum vignetting, and I don't think it flares half as bad as this lens. So I do currently have the Sigma 35 DGDN f2 lens to test, which is an autofocus lens. If you saw my video on maybe I should get some autofocus lenses, yeah, I can let you know if that's any good. If you found this video useful, please smash the like button. Hopefully it saves some of you some money, or maybe you want to make a pre-order depending on if you can relate to this lens and if this lens is good for what you're trying to achieve. If you're looking for a source of Leica related gear reviews, definitely feel free to subscribe, because that's what we do on this channel. As always, a massive thanks to my awesome patrons. And if you enjoyed this video, you may want to watch my review of the Voigtlander 35 f2 APO lens next.